Ryan and Eric, who would you say some of your favorite guests are that we've had on the podcast?
Ryan, I would say it was your dad, a Vietnam veteran that had intense action stories as well as touching and meaningful, content about, his life and yours.
That's true. I do have to say my dad, he has to be my favorite, but a close second would probably be COVID virologist.
Oh, that was amazing. I'd say it's a toss-up between Jason Weems, who is a comedian who died on stage and was resurrected to be on our podcast and raise his family and other things, other responsibilities. And we also had a Marine One, or like presidential helicopter pilot on the show, and that was crazy.
That's a good one. That's hard to beat. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, tune into the Baggage Podcast, where four friends, a prosecutor, a doctor, a comedian, and a journalist, interview ordinary people about their extraordinary experiences. Search for Baggage wherever you get your podcast.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Our guest today is attorney Ken Kunken. Ken broke his neck playing football for Cornell University in 1970, leaving him almost totally paralyzed from the shoulders down.
Once again, I have to repeat, I did not know of another quadriplegic who was doing this kind of work before I had the opportunity to do it. And I was fortunate that when I applied for a job with the district attorney's office, the district attorney at the time, a person by the name of Dennis Dillon, placed his hiring decisions on my abilities rather than my disability. And there weren't many people back then that would have done that. And I am so pleased that I was given that opportunity. And I hope many more people will now be given that same opportunity.
Let's join today's inspiring conversation with Ken Kunken.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for this show. Our guest today is attorney Ken Kunken. Hello, Ken, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mel, and it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So as a writer myself, I want to begin this conversation by talking about your memoir, which is called I Dream of Things That Never Were. I have a couple of specific questions about the process before we get into the contents of it, if you don't mind. So first of all, I'm curious if you were more influenced by Robert Kennedy Sr.'s speech or George Bernard Shaw's writing that inspired Robert F. Kennedy's speech. So, and the words were, some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream of things that never were and say, why not?
That quotation has always been so meaningful to me. Just so your listeners know, while I was still a patient in a rehab facility, I had the opportunity to testify before a United States Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And the words on that inscription have always been really meaningful to me. The inscription read, some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not. And that inscription had made such an impression on me. I love the way it sounds. I love the meaning. And when I think of my life, I think it fits very appropriately.
Do you still have that paperweight?
I sure do. Very valuable paperweight in my mind.
That's pretty awesome. All right, since you are a quadriplegic, how did you go about writing the book? Did you dictate it or did you use text-to-speech software? I'm just curious about that process.
Well, it started while I was still a patient in the rehab facility. A friend of my Aunt Lorraine's by the name of Albert Megalin came to visit me in the rehab facility and thought that it would be very informative to a lot of people to know what it's like to go through rehabilitation and what a spinal cord injury entailed. He also knew that I was very depressed at the time, and he thought it would be helpful if I was able to talk about what I was going through. So for a number of weeks, he would come once a week to the rehab facility and ask me to talk to him and tell him what was going on in my life. And we did that for a few weeks before I used to go home on weekends while I was still a patient in the facility. So he visited me there a few times at my aunt's home. And then I left for college. So when I'd come back on breaks, I would go over it with him again. And then I tried on my own to type on my IBM Selectric typewriter a little bit about what I was going through. And then I would put it down for years, pick it up again, put it down for years, until finally I got married and I became the father of triplet boys. And my wife and I decided this is really a story that needs to be told. And when the boys were really little, Anna's mother visited with us to help with the babies. And at that time, Anna had some time to sit down with me and actually type on her computer my story. Now, I might add, I first tried doing it by voice recognition, and it just didn't seem to be working out well for me. First, it was relatively new for voice recognition back then. I was using a system called Drag and Dictate, and it was very frustrating at the time. And finally, Anna just sat beside me, and I would dictate to Anna, and that's how we did the book.
Wow, that's really interesting. So let's talk about your family a little bit before we get into more of the details of your life, of the other parts of your life. So you mentioned your wife, Anna. She's, from what I have read, she's 6'1", and she's from Poland, and you have triplet boys. So how did all this come about?
All right. Well, because I'm totally paralyzed, I need help in doing virtually everything. With all aspects of daily living, I need assistance. So usually what I do is I put an ad in the newspaper, and, when people respond, I would interview them and basically try and talk them through or teach them what's involved in my physical care. And over the years, I've had some women take care of me as well. But it's very difficult for a woman because they need to be able to lift me from the bed to the wheelchair and then, of course, back again. So somebody suggested that I put an ad in the Polish newspaper, which is published here in America as well, because they said I'd get a lot of good applicants from that paper. So I put an ad in, and I was fortunate. Anna was here in the States at the time. She responded to my ad, and as luck would have it, we clicked. And although Anna had never done this work before, I hired her, and she was great, absolutely great. And the more time we spent with each other, the more our relationship got stronger, until eventually became a romantic relationship that resulted in marriage. And when we first talked about getting married, Anna told me that she'd like to have my baby, and not just a baby, my baby. So now this really seemed impossible. At the time, I'd been paralyzed for more than 30 years, and I was already in my 50s. But we looked into different aspects of male fertility and saw that with in vitro fertilization, it still may be possible for me to father a child. So we pursued it, and it took a while, but my procedure finally became successful. And then Anna went through a lengthy procedure with a lot of hormone treatments. And as luck would have it, Anna became pregnant. And on January 24th, 2005, I was present in the delivery room when my wife gave birth to triplet boys. Well, we have 3 beautiful sons, Joseph, James, and Timothy. They're now 20 years old, and they're sophomores at 3 separate colleges in upstate New York. They're pursuing different majors, all doing incredibly well, and I couldn't be more proud or happier to be the father of these triplets and be married to my incredible wife. So I have a lot of positives in my life that I'm happy to share.
That certainly sounds like you got a lot of positives. But them going to 3 different schools, that's that's crazy by itself, trying to keep up with them and maybe visit them once in a while. How does that work out?
Mel, this was when they left for college. It was the first time they were ever separated in their lives for more than a few days. That was the first time. And they all decided they had some different interests, despite obviously being triplets. And fortunately, they decided to go to 3 separate schools in upstate New York, where they're each within about an hour's drive from each other. My son James is at the State University of New York at Morrisville, where he's studying renewable energy. My son Timothy is pursuing a dual major at the Newhouse School of Communications and the Maxwell School of Public Affairs at Syracuse University. And my son Joseph is studying mechanical engineering at my alma mater, Cornell University.
That's pretty awesome. My son happens to be a mechanical engineer. He graduated in 2020. So I definitely understand that kind of a mind, that kind of a brain that builds things.
Right. And fortunately, our one condition was that they go to schools that are within driving distance of us to make it easier for us to visit them, but for them to get back and forth to school. And it's just worked out great. They're all doing terrific.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So let's talk about your accident that led to your paralysis. This was in 1970, so this was quite a while ago. But what details do you recall about the actual accident itself?
I think I remember every single detail about what happened. I was playing on Cornell's lightweight football team, and we were playing in a game against Columbia University. And on the first play of the game, one of our players got hurt on a kickoff, and I actually was then put in to take his place on the kickoff squad. And during this game, we were still in the first quarter. We had just scored a touchdown, put us ahead 16-0, and I was in on the kickoff squad taking this fellow's place. And I ran down the field, tackled the ball carrier, and when I did, I broke my neck and severely damaged my spinal cord. So I then spent the next 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers.
Wow. So again, that was 1970. The next year, 1971, you returned to Cornell, and that was almost 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act. How were you able to navigate your way around campus?
It was really difficult. I mean, Cornell's in upstate New York. It's on a very hilly terrain. And at that time, there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. And one of my classes, which met 3 times a week, was located in a building that had 16 steps in front of it. And my dorm room was in a building that had 10 steps just to get in. So on my first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend my first day. So it was a lot of work for my personal care attendant as well as my fellow classmates. But with their help, I was able to get back and forth to class.
You were never frustrated to the point of thinking about trying something different, going somewhere else?
I was frustrated a lot, many times along the way. And I used to lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, thinking I must be crazy. What was I thinking? Going back to Cornell when it was just so difficult to get to school and get to class, let alone, absorb the material. But I just didn't have a plan B. I didn't know what else I would do if I didn't stick it out and continue with my education there.
Well, you may not have had a plan B for going to Cornell, but you definitely had a plan B and C for the direction of your career. How did you change your focus from engineering to psychology to law?
Well, when I was injured, I had just started my junior year in industrial engineering. And I thought the best way for me to continue was to continue with engineering. Now, this was well before the time of laptop computers. And when I went back to school, even though I continued with engineering, it really didn't just seem like a viable field for me. So while I was at school, I took some electives in psychology. And fortunately, I had a psychology professor by the name of Dr. James Moss, who took an interest in me and encouraged me to pursue a career in counseling. Instead, he felt that I could make a difference in people's lives working as a counselor. So based on his suggestion, after I graduated from Cornell, I stayed at Cornell and pursued a master's degree in counseling and student personnel administration. And then to increase my counseling credentials, I went to Columbia University, where I earned my second master's degree. This one was in psychological counseling and rehabilitation. And I went to work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, which I enjoyed very much.
And then to law.
Right. Well, what happened was, as much as I enjoyed my work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, I often spoke at conferences and before groups and organizations concerning non-discrimination and affirmative action for people with disabilities. And often after my talks, I would be asked questions. And while I'd certainly do my best to answer those questions, I was always careful to caution the questioners they should really speak with a lawyer about their concerns. And I guess it didn't take long before I started to think, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. So I left my job and went to Hofstra University School of Law.
Hey, that's quite an adventure, all within the confines of the state of New York, right?
Right.
So you were once featured on the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale's nationally syndicated radio broadcast, The American Character. What do you remember about that?
Well, that really surprised me. It was right before I left my job as a rehab counselor. I was preparing to go to law school, and there was an article about me in the Long Island newspaper Newsday. And apparently that attracted the attention of an aide to Reverend Norman Vincent Peale. And he thought it would make an interesting story on his radio broadcast. He had a 1-minute radio broadcast that was recorded and published throughout the nation called The American Character. And he thought that what I was doing with my life represented the American character. And I was so proud for him to have done that.
That's really incredible. All right. So once you started focusing on your law career, you spent more than 40 years with the district attorney's office, eventually becoming one of the deputy bureau chiefs of the county court trial bureau. What was the best part about that job for you?
Well, the best part about it was I had the opportunity to go to court, use my mind because, I was making use of my verbal skills and be able to help people in a very different way than I had in the past. Now, I have a brother who's 2 years older than me that was working as a defense attorney at the time. And he suggested I work at the district attorney's office. So I was fortunate to get a job with them. Excuse me one moment. I just need a drink of water. My wife's going to help me with that. And I did an internship at the district attorney's office. And I found a new way that I could help people and serve the community. And while there, I also had the opportunity to mentor a lot of other law students while I was there. And I liked that very much. And then, I did a lot of litigation and was fortunate to be promoted a number of times until I was made one of the deputy bureau chiefs.
Oh, that's the best part about the job. What was the toughest part about the job?
It was real difficult going to court. Actually, let me start right at the beginning. I finished 3 years of law school, passed the difficult New York State bar exam the first time I took it. I went through a very intensive 4-week training program at the office where they taught us all aspects of trial techniques from a prosecutor's perspective. I went to court my first day, and I couldn't fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom. They were too narrow to allow me to get through in my electric wheelchair. So when you say what was the toughest parts, just getting into the courtroom was one of them. But it was really difficult. There was still a lot of paperwork that I needed to juggle and to learn and to master. There were certainly the attitudes of different people about what somebody, with my type of disability could actually do and function in the office. And I wasn't aware of another quadriplegic at the time who was working as a trial attorney, let alone an assistant district attorney. So I faced a lot of challenges, but I had a lot of help from my fellow assistant district attorneys, the paralegals, the student interns, the support staff. And I also had to rely on a lot of my memory, which I worked very hard to improve so that I could go to court and be able to argue a case without having a lot of notes in front of me.
Wow, that's a challenge I never even thought about. So how long did it take you to master that skill?
Well, it was a constant effort. I mean, I was constantly working to improve myself, but I did a lot of trials while I was there. In fact, I did a total of 76 trials, 65 of which were felonies. And part of mastering it was working on improving my own confidence so that I knew I could rely on myself, my skill, my ability, my memory, and be able to go to court and handle difficult cases.
So you talked about building your confidence. With all the other things that you experienced and accomplished, it seemed like confidence wouldn't be an issue, but you're telling me it still was.
When I was first injured, I would say if I go back before I was injured, I would have considered myself a bit of an introvert. I was kind of shy, despite the fact that I, played sports. I was a member of a fraternity. I was the type of person that would sit in the very back of the lecture room, never raise his hand, did not try to draw any attention to myself. And suddenly here I was in front of a lot of people and having to talk. And it took quite a while for me to get used to that and to be able to feel more confident about getting up in front of a group and speaking before people. And that took a while to work on. And even though I had, attained a good amount of accomplishments in my life, it was still a challenge to get up in front of a group and speak.
Well, clearly you did an admirable job in the course of your career influencing other people there in the DA's office. And in 2020, you were inducted into the Susan M. Daniels Disability Mentoring Hall of Fame. Was that the best thing that happened to you during the pandemic year of 2020?
It probably was, other than watching my boys, continue to grow and do wonderful things in their life. But it was such a good feeling to be recognized that, I was helping others pursue their careers. And, over my years in the district attorney's office, I had the opportunity to mentor a lot of law students, as well as college students and even some high school students. And it made me feel really, really good that here I was in a position where I could help others succeed in their career. And I might add that, when you leave your job at the district attorney's office, they usually had us go through what's called an exit interview, where they ask the individual what was the best part of their job, what parts they thought could be improved. And I was so pleased to hear that a number of assistants said one of the best parts of their job was meeting, getting to know, and working with me. And I say that not to brag, not to boast, but because I know these students were talking about meeting, getting to know, and working on a daily basis with somebody with a significant disability. Because unless they had a close relative with a disability, they rarely came in contact with somebody with a serious disability. And I think for many of them, it was a revelation that for one, in so many ways, we're no different from them with respect to our hopes, dreams, fears, what we want to do in life. And they also realized that it didn't involve any extra work for them. I certainly carried, my workload sufficiently. And, when you hear people attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion now, it really upsets me because here, if they spoke to anybody in my office, they would tell them that one of the best parts of their job was having the opportunity to work with somebody with a severe disability. And I might add that 2 years ago, the district attorney of Nassau County actually started an annual award called the Kenneth J. Kunkin Award. It's obviously named for me because she felt it important to recognize and honor the assistant district attorney who best exemplifies the work ethic of the person in a wheelchair. And I'm so proud of that.
That was actually my next topic to bring up. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So this, again, to give a little bit more detail, is now presented by the Nassau County District Attorney's Office to the outstanding Nassau County District Attorney who personifies your unique spirit and love of trial work, as well as his commitment and dedication, loyalty to his colleagues, and his devotion to doing justice. So how does that feel like your legacy?
I hope that's one of them. And once again, I have to repeat, I did not know of another quadriplegic who was doing this kind of work before I had the opportunity to do it. And I was fortunate that when I applied for a job with the district attorney's office, the district attorney at the time, a person by the name of Dennis Dillon, placed his hiring decisions on my abilities rather than my disability. And there weren't many people back then that would have done that. And I am so pleased that I was given that opportunity. And I hope many more people will now be given that same opportunity.
That's pretty awesome. And we talk about your Hall of Fame, Disability Hall of Fame induction. I don't know if there's such a thing as a wife or spouse Hall of Fame, but it sounds like your wife should be an inductee, or maybe the first inductee, if there's not such a thing.
My wife should definitely be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, what my wife does every day to help me, and of course, when the kids were home, helping raise them, it was just incredible. I mean, words cannot begin to describe how fantastic an individual she is.
Well, she helped set up this interview, so I've had to communicate with her through messages. So I appreciate her help and support. And please tell her I said hi. She may be sitting there. So if she is, hi, Anna. I appreciate all your help. And I really admire the partnership that the two of you have together.
Thank you.
She says thank you, in case you didn't hear.
I heard her. All right, so that's going to wind up our episode today. Oh, no, first, I want to give you a chance to talk about your book. Tell me a little more detail about your book.
Okay. Well, I wrote a book about my life, some of the challenges that I've faced, a lot of the obstacles I've had to overcome, as well as some of my accomplishments along the way. And obviously, being married and having triplets is the highlight. It's called I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunkin story. And obviously I got that title from the quotation, some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not. Now, when I was first hurt, I didn't know of anybody else in my condition who was doing something productive with their lives. You just didn't see them out in the community. And part of that was because of the physical barriers, since it was well before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So there may have been people there doing different things with their lives, but I didn't know about them. And I think it would help people to have role models to show them that there's an awful lot somebody can do with a disability. And if, this could be one way of informing more people of different things you can do despite challenges that you face. I think that would be a really good thing. And I thought it important to get my story out there because hopefully that could help others. And I've been fortunate that some people have come to me and told me they've read the book and they found that it's inspired and motivated them to do more with their lives. And that makes me feel especially good.
That's great. And I will include a link in the show notes for anybody who wants to obtain a copy of the book and read it for themselves and hopefully comment on it and feel inspired to go on and do great things in their lives or help others within their circle. So our guest today has been attorney Ken Kunken. I appreciate you being here, Ken. It's been an enjoyable experience.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for having me as a guest and allowing me to share my story with your listeners.
Well, thanks for being here. My new website is www.podcastreallife.com. If you go there, you can find links to every platform that carries this show, and you can also find the links for everything that we discussed today. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.